Hello again. Good morning. Good morning to both of you that responded to me. We're going to have a good conversation. We are a panel technically, but I want it to be more informal than that. I want it to be more of a conversation. So I've got some questions for the gentleman here that I personally am curious about, and I field tested them in the last few days with some of you to ask if these were the right questions, and they sound like they are. So once we get through a couple of these, I want to pause and take questions. If you have anything specific that you're looking for, you want to hear from them once you hear what they have to share. Sound good? Before we get started, I'm about to let you do your intros really quick, but I have a question for you in the audience. Who is currently in the middle of, or is 12 to 18 months away from, doing an implementation? Higher, so I can see them all? Okay. About half, maybe? Okay. So a willing and receptive audience, ready to hear whatever you have to say. So, Dev, we'll start with you. Quick intro, tell us who you are, what you do.
So Dave from Harbinger Systems. I must first apologize for my voice. I've been under the weather for the last few days here. Ever since I landed in Dallas a couple of weeks ago, I had the great fortune to visit the northern parts of the country. They're beautiful, Seattle, Minneapolis, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, Chicago. I look forward to visiting them in summer, but this time I was looking forward to come to Florida for some warm weather. When I traveled from Minneapolis to Florida, I had a 64 degrees jump from entry to exit into the plane, which was very short-lived, and ever since again, I'm back to the cold weather. I look forward to a few minutes of warm weather here. In next couple of days, I work as a Vice President Enterprise Practice at Harbinger Systems. I know it's a little misleading, kind of ambiguous title, but a significant part of our business, we work with product and platform companies. We do their product engineering in an outsourced product development mode. We also work with the end users, which are enterprises like people who are here, and I head that part of the business, so that's what I do at Harbinger.
Awesome, thank you. Lou?
I'm Lou Fiore. I head up HRMS, payroll operations, HR shared services, and benefit and rewards platforms for Sodexo. I've been there 28 years, and Sodexo provides food and facility management across the globe. In North America here, we're about 126,000 employees and about 460,000 employees worldwide in 80 different countries. Been there 28 years, and I live in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, because about 10 years ago, our headquarters in the US is in Gaithersburg, Maryland. And I was like, I need a work-life balance. Something needs to change here. So with that DC traffic all the time, I made the move to Delaware, so I work remote. I still have an office in Gaithersburg, but it's nice to leave the office behind and kind of go over the bridge, the Bay Bridge, and then kind of be on the beach side. So I was excited to come to Florida, too, to be warm. But that hasn't happened yet, but looking forward to it pretty soon.
Awesome. Thank you two gentlemen. So just to set the stage for us, and I'll start with you, Deb, if you don't mind, set the stage for us a little bit. How important is implementation in the broader selection process?
Excuse me.
Right? We spend so much time talking about picking the right vendor, making sure we have the right selection process down, but I feel like a lot of employers don't put enough time and effort into thinking through the rest of that process on the implementation side. What do you think?
All right. Yeah, so I think implementation is extremely important. One of the trends happening right now, as we know, is people are moving from the product-based kind of ecosystems to platform-based ecosystems where you, instead of going for a ready-made product with all the features, you go for a platform that is more flexible and that can be fine-tuned, that can be customized to meet your needs. It is more overall, like it functions across your recruit-to-retire workflow. But at the same time, when you offer the flexibility, technology, we know, is an enabler. It doesn't solve a problem. It needs to be customized to your specific needs. Every org is unique. It's in a particular domain, it's in a particular business, and it has its own culture that requires a technology support that is consistent with the culture. You want to have those kind of that kind of functionality available, and we can talk about examples later. So I think implementation one must look at in addition to what functionality or features the technology is providing you.
Excellent. Yeah. Lou, any comments?
Yeah, I would add to what Dev said. I think it was perfect. But I would also add that I think in my company, at least, over the years, if I had $1 for every time someone came to me and said, oh, you're going to put the system in, that's going to fix everything for us, I could have probably retired a long time ago, not still be working here at 55. But Having said that, the implementation being key. I mean, like you said, you can pick the best technical platform. You can pick the right program for what you think it's going to do for your organization, et cetera. But that if the implementation doesn't go well, and there's a bad taste on the end of the end user, it's really hard to regain that trust again. And we talked about trust earlier. So I do think that implementation and all the thought and the process that goes into it is actually sometimes just as critical, if not more critical, than actually selecting the platform itself.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've got them on board. It's important. It's a big deal. Let's think about it. So let's talk about, I'll start with you again, Lou, on this, just coming back this way. What is the one thing you would say, like this is a critical success factor, and I know it's hard to probably boil it down to one thing, so I'll give you a break on two if you've got a couple points there, but what are the critical success factors to making sure this implementation actually ends up with the way that everybody envisions it and not the horrible flaming train wreck that ultimately it sometimes ends up as?
Right, but that never happens, right? So I think it's tough to say one thing, but if I had to say one thing, I think it's important to have the end user involved, the customer, to have your customer involved day one. Day one, when you're even thinking about doing an implementation, when you're even thinking about making a change, I think that customer has to have a seat at the table. And that person who's having, and when I say customer, I don't mean just the business area that's going to be impacted, because those are usually the subject matter experts, and they're really good in that space. But I mean the end user, and it can be your employee, it can be your customer, whoever that ends up being, that's your end user, they need to have a critical seat at that table too. And I think that in my world, that's proven to be the most valuable over time. And there's so many things, but I think that's one of the big key.
So getting the stakeholders, wherever they might come from, right?
Right,
If it's on,
wherever, right.
If it's talent acquisition, like let's have some candidates look at this thing, right? From their perspective, let's look at it just like a candidate would. Or if it's on the inside, let's
Exactly.
like an employee, look at our
And
payroll.
again, the subject matter experts have the best of intentions, but they know that system, they know that process inside and out. It's the end user that has to have that experience, because ultimately that's the service you're delivering, right? So making sure they're there.
I was at a company a few months ago in California. They're based in Los Angeles, and we were meeting with their team, and their SAP expert came in the room and talked about their new process they're building out, success factors for hiring, everything else. And everybody else in the room was like holding onto their chairs, like what in the world are they talking about?
Right.
It's feeling like a foreign language almost,
Right.
because they were so deep in it. So
Right.
I agree with that for sure.
Yeah. I think I totally agree with him. I think employee experience or user experience is taking the front stage in every walk of business, and I think here that's the key. I would stress more on the employee experience, because the customer, is a customer and is going to pay you money, automatically gets some attention. But employees and their experience we need to focus on, because they are one of the primary customers for the HR executives. And also, what I would add to that is, in addition to the current level of experience, you need to look at the future, because also things are changing as we go. So when you are implementing, you need to implement also for the future, not just for your current needs and looking at your current processes. That's another important factor, because you don't want to be in a situation where by the time you implement your system, you're already
Yes,
obsolete.
already behind, absolutely.
Already obsolete, yeah.
Don't try to solve just the problem today, but think long term.
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, it's the piece you said there, where it's not just customer first, but employee first potentially.
Yes.
There are some companies that have that philosophy from an HR and a company perspective, like HCL Technologies and Southwest. Like they're known for employees first, treat the employees well, do right by them, and the customers they'll take care of the customers. Right? They'll never treat the customers better than you treat them as an employee.
Yeah, which is great. Yeah.
Pretty much. Okay. We can have a lot of fun with this one.
Sure.
We'll try to keep it contained. Sure. So let's talk about the things that don't work. Talk about maybe lessons learned, experiences you've seen. We don't have to name any names. We don't want to. But tell me about some of these implementations that have gone bad, and maybe highlight the issue that triggered that.
I can give a few, because I work from the enabler side, from the technology provider. We solve problems for HR executives. But one of the ways things can go wrong is, as I said, people don't really they don't start from the requirements first. They start from the technology first. They get into one of the latest platforms, which are very flexible, which have great functionality offered. And then they assume that we'll figure out as we go how this platform is going to solve our problems. And More than often it doesn't. It has the capability, but the way the implementation process goes, there is a business process involved into that, and it doesn't always work the way you want. So I would say, before you go there, figure out internally, what are your priorities? What is it that you really want to do? On top of the functionality that is commonly used in the industry, you are a unique organization, you have your own requirements. Think about that, what kind of support you'll require, and start your implementation with that knowledge. Then you have a greater chance of success.
How often would you say someone tries to use a technology to solve a process problem and ends up making it worse?
I don't know if it becomes worse, but I have seen things just go into a never-ending process when everybody in the process gets frustrated, the provider, the user, the implementer, and it's just going in cycles. And there are multiple examples I can say.
I was going to say, the way that I always kind of comment on that is, if you put the technology on top of a bad process, you do the wrong thing even faster. And no one wants to be more efficient in making the wrong decision or taking the wrong step, but if you're just trying to apply the technology to that and the process isn't fixed on the underlying side, you end up with this, again, the flaming train wreck, basically. The example where the trust example that Jarek used earlier, like that trust drops like a rock, whether in the function or just in your capabilities.
Yes.
Okay. How about it, Lou? Tell us a story.
So I think real quick before the story, I think I would say also with what Dev said is one of the challenges that I kind of put to the teams most of the time is making sure that they look at standardizing their policies, processes, and procedures even before we're selecting the technology. So know what you're going to do in that space, and obviously more will happen when you lend yourself and when you've married yourself to the specific technology. But again, if we can do that ahead of time, especially like in HR shared services, implementing those and making sure like, okay, you've standardized, now the model makes sense, so let's talk about what technology can aid that. So I guess 28 years at Sodexo, so my big thing was 15 years ago, I was just over HRMS, and the Chief Human Resource Officer asked me to, would you do the payroll implementation for 126,000 people here in the US, no stress. And I said, oh my gosh, no, I'm the HRS person. I've only done like small and medium projects. There's no way I'm doing that. I went home and I thought, well, she asked me. Maybe she thinks I can do it. I don't know. So the next day we had a conversation and I made the career decision and said, okay, yes, I will do the payroll implementation. So payroll at the time was in finance, it wasn't in the HR side. So that was a little challenging. There were folks in finance who wanted to do the implementation. So it was a little dicey at first, and I was like, okay, but I can do this, and I went through my project methodology and all that kind of stuff. And about 3 or 4 months into the project, it was about a 24 to 30 month project. The chief application architecture officer came and said, oh, we're also going to do the front end piece for the time data in the labor management system. And we're going to do that in-house. So we're going to go at the same time that you're going. And I thought, well, I know I'm just a senior director and there's a vice president, senior vice president, and an officer, and they must know what they're doing. But I'm thinking, that's got to be risky. But sir, we did our projects together and everything, and I had the best consultants, I had the best teams. We made sure we did our training, we did our change management and everything. And so fast forward to go live, and we have about 7,000 locations, and we split our pay week ending dates in two. One was on a Friday, and one was on a Saturday. So we're in a war room, we're making the big switch. They've put the time clocks in, they've put the time and attendance system or labor management system in, and then my piece is the payroll piece coming behind it. And by 2 p.m., 3,500 units that particular day, and then 3,500 units the next day at 2 p.m. were supposed to transmit their payroll. So 2 o'clock rolls around, we're in the war room, and the team's like, okay, we've got 5. I'm like, all right, we've got 500. I said, it's gonna take people, it's a little while. We had planned to have a runway where it was okay to be a little bit late transmitting 3-4 hours. It's a new experience and everything. So I'm like, okay, we've got to kind of go into triage mode. We've got to reach out to the units. And they're like, well, Lou, you just need to understand, it's 5 units that have transmitted, not 3,500, only 5 units. So I'm like, okay, Houston, we have a problem here. So, and all because no matter how good the payroll implementation had been planned out, and we had our challenges just like any other payroll implementation, but that front end piece, and my gut had told me, hey, that front end piece, I need to have a bigger say, and my gut said to kind of push back on that, but I didn't in the organization. That's a lesson learned. We got through all of that. It was rocky at first, and we transmitted, and we got through it, and we had to do some lots of exception pay those few few first periods, but we got through it. But lesson learned is like kind of listen to your gut. And also, you can control everything within your environment. It's usually something that's outside of your environment that's adversely going to impact your implementation. So be thinking about those things as well and plan for those.
Don't get blinded, I guess,
Don't
by
get blinded,
just the
right.
things that are within
Right,
purview.
exactly.
Keep an eye out outside.
It was many years ago. I've done many since then, but yes, it was many years ago, but
Okay.
lesson learned.
Okay. Wow. Just 5.
Yeah, just 5. 5 units, only almost 7,000 more to go. That's 5.
Wow. Okay. Thank you for the story. I'm a sucker for stories. I appreciate that. So, Dev, question for you. One of the things you mentioned earlier was platforms.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Talk about platform versus suite versus point solution. I know that's one of the big questions people have, and it seems like going one way or the other would be easier potentially, but I want you to just talk through some of those options. What are the risks, what are the challenges, what are the opportunities?
So the way I would put it as is, products do offer you very fine-tuned solutions for a particular use case, but they come out of the box, and one solution fits all doesn't work these days because every org is unique, as we talked about. Platforms on the other side give you a much bigger flexibility and a reach. They work across your entire workflow. So there is a trend typically that we have seen that people want to move from products into platforms, and they want to kind of work, if possible, work across the entire workflow. What ends up happening is because of various business issues, business constraints, you end up, with an ecosystem where you have part products. There are some products you have invested in that everybody is happy with. Some parts you're not happy with that you replace with a platform, and then you have an ecosystem that is a mix of point solutions and some products in learning management, applicant tracking system. You have your big platforms that take care of the rest of the functions, and you have the responsibility to work with this ecosystem, which is mixed. Now, so this is where you need to look at what you have and make it work for your organization. That's the challenge. So it's not, do you want to go for product? Do you want to go for platform? It's more often than not, we have seen always a mix. Where there are big companies going in for end-to-end platforms like SAP SuccessFactors, Workday. But there are some parts that they say, no, we don't want to change. We will keep it. Learning management system, we just love what we have and we will not change it. And then the challenge is to work with this system. So that is something that orgs need to look at and say, how do I, for my organization, make it work seamlessly? How do I put my process through this entire ecosystem so that they work all hand in hand for me? Which I would say is one of the challenges that orgs need to look at. Otherwise, you'll end up working in bits and pieces, and everybody will be worrying about how do I how do I export an Excel file that I kind of load here, and then I got a wrong file. No, I gave a right. And those kind of things you want to avoid.
Yes, absolutely. Well, it's funny, we did some research this year around what employees are using. We asked them if they're using platform, if they're using multiple best-of-breed solutions, like what does your stack look like? And we came away with very conclusive evidence that there's no complete answer for everybody. It's all over the place.
Exactly.
It was funny to see because it spiked here. I'm like, okay, that means that at this employee headcount size, that's what it's going to be. And the very next one, it drops off again. And it was kind of all over the map. And there was not a specific correlation that went across that we could plot and figure out exactly what it looked like. And the thing I came away with was it really depends on a lot of the variables inside your business, right? If you are very compliance-focused, compliance-heavy, like the LMS tools and things you use might be different. You might need a specific solution to solve for that. Or if recruiting is a big challenge, like we've got to have a specific TA solution outside of the bigger platform or system, the one system to rule them all. We might need something more specific and more dedicated to solve that one. We were actually talking about something like this earlier around you guys were thinking about changing some systems globally, and you said at least for the North American piece of that, you're trying to get closer to consolidating some of those things, maybe?
Right, exactly. We have definitely point solutions right now, and part of that is, at least from being a global company, is like how much of that is going to be core HCM, if you will, how much of that will be specific to the region, how much of that will be specific to additional modules within that core platform. But it's also challenging the business, right? And saying, okay, we all have different nuances, we all have different processes out there, but are there things that we can do to get more closer to core, get more closer to standardizing those processes, especially in the world of in the world that we're in with AI and RPAs and everything. So it's kind of pushing the envelope a little bit there because we often think we have nuances, I think, that are greater than they truly are. And that's, there are certainly things that are different, but there are things that we probably can get to a more standardized approach, if you will.
Okay. Speaking of standardization, so I gave these gentlemen, I said, I'm going to ask you some questions that I want to know, but I'm also going to let you pick something that you want me to ask you about, okay? Full transparency here. And Lou said, I am so excited to talk about governance. Said no one ever, but Lou said it. So he's going to talk about governance a little bit.
Don't think it was those words, but yeah.
Talk about governance as part of this. Again, all joking aside, this is one of the things as well, we talked about it earlier, that people kind of skim over, like, oh, we've got a governance plan, check, and just move on without ever looking at it, thinking about it, getting buy-in, any of those other things. And then you look back later like, where did we go wrong? And so talk about governance as part of this overall process.
A little bit was for the organization's self-preservation, because being in over HR and the IT side of HR and everything, every single department or business entity would come and say, oh, I've got a great new product. Oh, I'm getting ready to sign a contract, or I need to go do this. And they were like literally coming from all over the organization. And it was exhausting trying to keep up with those. So putting the governance model in place, kind of what it's allowed us to do, at least within the organization, is give visibility, transparency, and then a bit of oversight and standardization on how we approach project implementations, if you will. So we actually have like we call it a POP, or it's a project origination proposal, if you will. And it gives visibility not just within HR, but within IS&T, within procurement, within finance, and all the other entities within the organization. I have an idea, I have a project, I have a tool I want to implement, I have something that's going to change. So we actually create this project origination document, and it's basically a template that we fill out. And it talks about who the sponsors are, it talks about the impact, the scope, what you're looking to do. And then we go through a process, and it's shared on we have a monthly IT steering committee that we go and present this to. People ask questions, and they either decide, yes, we're going to move forward with this, or no, maybe you should talk to somebody over in procurement because they've already got something like that tool in place. So it does give visibility within the organization that we didn't necessarily have within the silos, within all the different segments. Then we go through a charter phase where you're really selecting your vendor. You've gone through your RFI, RFP. You've gone in and done that. You've put together what the financial implications, what's the business case, what's the return on investment, info security components of it. Does it fit into our existing architecture, et cetera? Go through that process, and then we have a design toll gate right before you go through your design piece. So again, another template that we go through a design toll gate and say, okay, we've worked with the vendor now, we worked really close with this product, here's what we're doing, again, here's what the assumptions that we've made, and go through an approval process. And then we have a go, no-go decision right before go live, and again, another template that we go through, they finalize that. They get approval to go, we go into production, and then at the end of that, after stabilization, it's usually within 30 days or less, we go through and actually do a lessons learned on that particular project with the same audience. But again, it's cross-division, cross-segment within the organization.
One of those things kind of stood out to me. You said, hey, we've already got, some cases, like, hey, we've already got
More
this.
often not.
We're paying
Exactly.
for it. Why don't you just go use it?
Just go use that one, exactly.
And that's one of the things I see really large organizations sometimes don't realize that, especially
Right.
when they're fragmented. You said
Right.
earlier, I think we were talking earlier, you said you're in how many countries? 80?
We're in 80 countries, right?
Countries?
Right.
And so there's a good chance that someone may have bought
already
that
doing
piece,
something in
that
that
piece of
space.
technology
Right.
already.
Yep.
Really interesting, really interesting. All right, I was going to pause for a minute. Any questions from the audience? I've got a couple more I want to ask, but can we get a mic, run around, right up here in the front, please? Coming. There we go. Awesome. Let's turn it on. All right, shout it
There
out.
it goes.
I'll let you know, and then you can repeat it if you want.
All right.
But kind of my question, probably more directed towards Lou, was earlier you talked about having the end user responsible in kind of the selection design process. Just thinking about all the ways that can go completely off the rails, and your implementation is this weird hard mark to satisfy all. What's the process you would recommend for getting that vital input?
The question, just to make sure everybody heard the question, specifically around when you have an end user at the table from the beginning when you're implementing a project, how do you keep that from going amok, if you will, and then having requirements that are all over the place, I think is what you said. So one of the things that we do is we run focus groups. We've run focus groups with teams, and it may be getting input ahead of time before we go out and reach out to that particular audience. It's understanding what the key questions are and what the key requirements from those end users might be in the implementation. And then we kind of see who's really passionate about that. But there's an art to it, so you're exactly right. I think making sure that we're not building for every instance or every type of incident that could occur. We're kind of going with the 80-20 rule. So there's some education and some change management and some, like I said, education I think that goes on early on, both from on the business side and kind of getting them to understand how the technical components work of a platform. And then on the flip side, getting the technical folks to really understand, hey, there's a true business need here. So it's a fine art, but it's something that we try to handle with focus groups and kind of find out who's passionate. We'll do town halls and things like that to try to figure out who the best players might be to augment the team.
I was going to say, even before that, on the selection side, you were building out personas for what sort of functions you're trying to, what kind of roles you're trying to get a piece of technology to solve those kind of problems, things like that.
Right.
They can be weighing in there, and maybe it doesn't feel as bad or as weird to try to bring them after.
Right.
For the
we implemented, to your question, we implemented Salesforce for HR shared services, for our CRM and our employee portal and everything. And the look and feel of that was really designed by the employees, not by the subject matter experts, because we would talk and speak like, oh, here's what they want to know about their benefits. And we would call benefit things like PTO, you'd call PTO, whatever. And employees like, I don't even know what PTO means. Is it vacation? I want to see vacation. This is how I want to navigate. So that was all instructional on how we kind of designed our layout and the end user experience.
Even the verbiage,
even the verbiage absolutely
is a part of that.
Yeah,
it's not just the process or having them involved in designing how it's going to roll out, but what would you call this? What does everybody know it as? Because that's you don't want it to be.
Right. HR knows it as one thing, but your employees or your end users know it as something very different.
Yes. Okay. Who else? Another question. Nobody wants to know anything. All right. I do. So I'm going to ask some more questions. So Dev. Talk about data integration a little bit. We've talked about platforms and other pieces of that, right? A platform, in essence, should give you better visualization on your data, better insight into your data if it's all in one place, but sometimes it's not as easy as just snapping your fingers, making that happen. Talk about the data piece of this.
Right, yeah. So, I did tell Ben that, that's one thing I'm passionate about, data, and surprise, right? Anybody here who is not passionate about data or thinks data is not important, then obviously not. Data is very important right now, and I will kind of phrase it a little differently. Rather than saying how we use the data, I think the real question that we have is what data needs to be used, and how does that data need to be how does the data need to be used when you extract it? Now, I'll start with an example maybe of this data. So in one of the companies that I worked earlier, there was a training program that we implemented because a particular technology we were heavily short and we were not getting it. And a lot of customer complaints from the projects that involved that technology. So we carefully researched our training team, and then we put in a program in place, and we worked for 6 months, and then we gathered data around that program. Now, typically, when you put a training program, you will gather data about the effect of the training program. So you say, customer satisfaction has it increased, how is your defects leakage, and all that kind of stuff. Luckily, our company was more open. So we looked at pieces of data that we thought were irrelevant. We were surprised to find out that the only thing that changed after we put in this 3 to 6 months of training was our attrition. There was nothing at all that changed in any of the project-related parameters. Then we went back and said, why did this happen? And then we figured out how this happened because we looked at the data. When earlier, before we started training, the people who got involved with the technology, with the projects, where people were passionate about it, they didn't mind getting into the technology, spending, the evenings, nights, learning about the technology, coming up to speed. And that was the factor we would use to allocate people to the team. When the training was put in place, automatically training kind of took over, and then we kind of looked for guys who have trained in the technology, and we put them there. They were not passionate. The project outcome did not get affected at all. And that was a big learning for us, that our data, when you say you have to look at the entire set of data, you don't just look at one corner because you are biased. When you are putting in training, you want to prove that your training is effective. You look at the parameters that will positively change. So it's important to look at data across the systems, not just at one. And it's important to look at the data from the perspective of your objective, why you are doing something, and how do we need to keep changing your perspective, your view of the data as you go forward.
Well, that reminds me, I had a chance to talk with Honeywell about a month ago,
Yeah.
and their head of HRMS, and he was telling me that in the 3 years before they were launching a new piece of technology, they spent that 3 years doing nothing but cleaning their data, getting it organized, making sure they knew where all of it was stored, making sure they could connect it all in once they were ready, the ones they wanted to, anyway.
Yeah.
And he said, we had such a hard time getting the rest of the business to buy into this because to push the pause button for 3 years is a huge investment. Even just to do nothing costs something. And he said, but in the end, now that they're done on the other side of it, everybody said, that was the right decision because now we actually get clean data, we get good reporting. It's not just garbage coming out of the system. We can actually make decisions based on this from a business perspective. But he said it was really hard to figure that one out and get the buy-in for that.
Yes. And if I have 30 more seconds, I can give one more example, which I think is very important. I work for a company where the talent management, they were looking at in a very, very different way. Typically, you would look at skills in different areas that you require in the company. This company followed a Moneyball-like a pattern, if you guys have seen the Moneyball movie, where the talent management wasn't done at people level, it was done at the skill level. So they looked at when a person is deployed into a particular role, what are the 6 or 7 skills that the person is supposed to bring to the table? And that skill in a person, in a team, in a business unit, and in the organization, how are we placed in terms of these skills which are required to be deployed? And when they did the talent management at that level, they had to capture data at that level. And then they had to use the data for everything, including project allocations, including forecasting, which was a very different way of doing your talent management. Now, first, this was my point. First, you need to figure out what is it that you want to do and what data you need to look at, because the systems will not give it to you automatically.
If only.
Yeah, I wish they were, but yeah.
Okay, Lou, we got time for one more question. I'll throw it to you. One of the things that you said you were also interested in kind of discussing a little bit, sharing some insights maybe on, is around third-party partnerships on the implementation side.
Yep.
What insights do you have there?
No, we talked a little bit about that before the conference, and I think one of the things that's important is making sure you pick the right implementation partner, and I think that goes without saying, right? But how do you know what the right one is? And there's going back to that cultural fit. One of the lessons learned over time with the many implementations that we've done, I think it's don't be afraid of the boutique implementation partners. Don't be afraid of somebody who maybe you've got a good connection with, they've got some great experience, but you feel like they're going to work with you as and I know it's overrated, the word partner, but they're truly being a partner. They have your best interest. They have an independent perspective that they're bringing to the table. And I think making sure that they're there in the war room with you. They're there in when you're mitigating an obstacle or you're trying to figure out what's going on and you've got some issues that came up that weren't planned. They're brainstorming with you to try to mitigate those and get you to a successful launch. So I think making sure that you really carefully select your implementation partner based on some criteria that you may set that's important for your organization will serve you well in the end.
Would you be willing to share a couple of those criteria or some things to look for, things to think about? Besides a partner, I want them to fit with us, but...
Yeah, and we actually, when we just did HR shared services not too long ago, we put like I said, the employee platform in, we put our CRM, a knowledge base, a call center, all that kind of stuff in our centers of excellence. And we interviewed different partners for that, and there was some of the criteria where they've done it for large-scale implementations. Yeah, so they met the threshold. They've done it for companies our size. They've done it on the platforms that we've had. But when we looked at interviewing them and talking to them and looking at their references and having those references, there was a theme for us that was missing. And this particular theme was the people experience, right? Which was really important to us. And it didn't necessarily come out in some of the big partners that we interviewed for that, but with a smaller one that we had looked at, and the theme that they constantly reiterated was the end user experience. And that ended up being one of the things that was really important to why we were doing this, because we had no way of reaching our frontline employees, which was our biggest population, because our frontline employees don't have Sodexo email addresses. So that was one of the things that was really key to us. And the way their model worked, their experience, and the fact that they were willing to really come at it from that perspective kind of said to us, I think you're a better fit for what we're trying to do here and deliver in the end.
Awesome. Excellent. Lou, Dev, thank you so much for sharing with us. I really appreciate it. Did you enjoy this?
Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks.